Hi, today we are going to demonstrate how may you create your first test case in vREST. In vREST, a group of HTTP requests or APIs can be organized to be executed in sequence, and each HTTP request is represented as a test case. We are using a sample test application named as Contacts application. It is simply a CRUD application and one can add, view, update, and delete contacts. We have assumed that you have already signed up and created an instance in vREST. Here we are using an example instance. So when you create your instance in vREST, you will be landed on this page after visiting the instance link. So let's create our first test case. We are creating a test case to validate the Add Contacts API of Contacts application. To create a new test case, click on the New Test Case button or click on New button in the Test Case toolbar. A modal window will appear. Here in this window, simply provide the API URL. The base URL of this API can contain any host like localhost, intranet IP addresses, or public-facing host name or IP addresses. vREST executes all of its test cases on the client machine, so it can validate any API hosted on localhost, intranet, or internet. Now specify the test suite in which you want to add the test case. Provide the test case summary to make your test case more understandable for other team members. And finally, add the HTTP method for this API that is being used and click on Save button to save the test case. This is the test case we just created. Click on Test Case Header to expand it. The first tab is Details tab. In this tab, you may edit test case URLs. You may provide some description or change method or provide external ID. External ID is basically used to integrate vREST with third-party tools like Jira, Slack, etc. We can use this information and send this information to any linked third-party tool. Then versions field to associate versions to this test case. Then tags and condition for conditional execution of this test case. We will cover conditional execution in upcoming tutorials. Then loop source if you want to execute this test case inside a loop. This is also helpful in data-driven testing. We will cover this in upcoming tutorials. Then authorization to associate various authorizations to this test case. vREST supports 4 types of authorizations: basic authorization, raw authorization, OAuth 1.0, and OAuth 2. We will also cover this in upcoming tutorials. Wait for seconds property is basically to introduce delay between 2 test cases. This test case will wait for its execution by the specified number of seconds. Then the Request tab. This tab further contains 3 subtabs: Parameters, Raw Body, and Headers. In Parameters subtab, you may define the request query, body, or path parameters. Let's define the body parameters for our sample API test case. You may even define these body parameters in raw body subtab in JSON format like this. If you enable this raw body, then body parameters defined in parameters subtab will be ignored. Then request header subtab. This tab is used to define the request headers of a test case like this. Now moving on to the Response Validation tab. In Response Validation tab, you may configure various assertions to validate the API response. A status code assertion is automatically added when a test case is created. You may modify this assertion according to your needs. You may set the expected body of the API response in expected body subtab and expected schema of the API response in expected schema subtab. Appropriate assertions related to expected body and expected schema will be automatically set once you enable these tabs. Let's execute this test case to see how test execution works. Just click on the Run All Test Cases button to execute this test case. To see the results of this test run, just go to the Results tab of this test case. You can see that the status assertion is passed, so the test case is marked as passed. If any of the defined assertions fail, then the test case will be marked as failed. This is how response validation works in vREST. Response validation is a powerful feature of vREST. We will cover response validation in detail in upcoming tutorials. You may see the execution time details of this test case by checking this Show Execution Time Details checkbox. Here you can see what vREST has actually fired for this test case. You may see the request URL, method, request headers, response headers, and actual response body. Next tab is Variable Extractor tab. This tab is useful in extracting the part of response, and then you can define a variable and use that variable in subsequent test cases. Here we are defining a variable, say contact ID, and specify the JSON path as _ID. Now we can use this contact ID variable in subsequent test cases. We will cover variable extraction in detail in upcoming tutorials. So this is how you may define and execute your test cases in vREST. To learn more about creating your first test case, you may visit our user guide and then go to the Writing Your First Test Case section in vREST Cookbook.